Hello and welcome back to the Decora Edit Podcast. I am Julia, and this week's episode is the second part of the conversation on sustainability I had with Fedra and Salem. In the previous episode, we discussed the social and environmental aspects of sustainability. I had such an educational chat with Fedra and Salem and definitely recommend you to give it a listen if you haven't yet. Moving on to this week's episode, before recording this episode, I've asked you to share all your questions on sustainability on the Decora Edit Instagram page. And on this note, I would like to thank everyone who got in touch and sent us questions. We got some really interesting ones and can't wait to answer you all in this episode. So let's get started. So the first question I'm going to answer here is about education, and so where to study sustainable fashion. I'm going to share a little bit of my experience here and some knowledge. There are two approaches you can take when it comes to education: self-study or go through a more traditional academic path. In regards to self-study, there are so many resources available these days, which make so much easier the learning journey. And that's certainly an advantage. However, that can be also extremely overwhelming. In my personal experience, I have a degree in traditional fashion design. However, most of the knowledge I have in sustainable fashion comes from reading, researching, and just generally following people involved in the movement. I'm going to share some of the resources I found useful through my learning process, and I hope might be of any help for you too. I think following relevant people across all social media channels is so important, and also a great resource because you have a constant flow of information coming your way, and that's so great. And you also can keep yourself up to date with news and events. And you might be surprised of how much you can actually learn from the people in the actual field. And I truly believe that it's so important that you find your own niche of people that you trust and that you align your values with. That's key. Some of the accounts I personally follow include Fashion Revolution, Remake, Global Fashion Exchange, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Eco Age, and Labor Behind the Label. These are some great organizations involved in ethical fashion as well as sustainability, and such great source of knowledge. I would also suggest you to browse through their websites, as they have a large amount of resources you can learn from. Some of them share some really insightful reports which really help me to have a better understanding of the fashion industry, but also change my mind on so many ways. Listening to podcasts, it's another great way to learn, as are a great source of information and also very easy to digest. So far, this is certainly my favorite channel for learning and keep me entertained while I'm doing so. I really enjoy the chat sharing knowledge format, and I think it really works well, especially during these times. I enjoy listening to these podcasts while I'm having breakfast in the morning or just when I'm doing very low-key tasks. I think it's just great. Some of the podcasts I actually follow are Wardrobe Crisis, Common Threads, Remember Who Made Them, and Conscious Chatter. And the themes of these podcasts vary from garment workers' rights to conscious consumption and just an overall look at the fashion industry from very different areas. And I think they're all very interesting for so many reasons and definitely worth a listen. Other more conventional resources you have available are books, articles, magazines, videos, plenty of resources out there that are at your reach. Moving to the academic path. So my thoughts on fashion education might be slightly unconventional, as I believe that you don't necessarily need a degree in fashion to be part of the industry. And in fact, your motivation, commitment, and determination, alongside a great range of skill set, obviously, are much more valuable. That being said, looking back at my degree course in a specific, not much was covered in terms of sustainable fashion, as even if it was only 4 years ago, sustainability wasn't as prominent in the industry as it is right now. But after all, I can certainly say that I have developed skills I didn't have necessarily before that course. So, after all, it was great. Anyway, if you're thinking to sign up for a degree in fashion, research the schools in your country or area and make sure they provide sustainable fashion focused courses. Another great way to start your sustainable fashion academic path can be online courses, and for these, you can look into Future Learn, which is a great platform for education. And you can find courses provided by organizations such as Fashion Revolution, as well as universities like London College of Fashion. And you can attend from anywhere in the world, and are definitely less expensive compared to a full time university degree course. Moving on to the next question, how can small brands or more in general companies compete with bigger ones while remaining sustainable?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I know the answer, to be honest. I think it's just going to be kind of based on my opinion. But I think small companies might be struggling with like very high operating costs sometimes. They don't really get the best deals from suppliers just because they are not mass producers. So they don't need the same volume of items. They don't need to order as much. Uh, Small companies, especially sustainable companies, often, uh, or let's hope always, pay living wages, minimum living wages at least to all employees. And also the materials that they purchase might be more expensive because they are better quality. So because of this, I would say a lot of the times they have higher costs than big companies, which can be difficult to kind of manage, and which can kind of uh, which can okay, let's cut this part. I think so. um, so they, because of the high operating costs that they have, it's sometimes difficult for them to grow. It's difficult for them to recruit more people, even if there's kind of like a high demand for their services. And sustainability can be an advantage. More and more people want to buy sustainable products these days. And as I mentioned before, I think by being sustainable, they have the advantage of being able to avoid risks and scrutiny, because big companies might be able to bring down their costs by not paying living wage or not providing safe working conditions. But eventually, these things will come to light because something will go wrong along the value chain. Something might happen, and that puts them into a very difficult position. So if that happens, they might need to cease trading. They might not be able to stay in market. So I think because of this, sustainability is definitely an advantage, and can be definitely an advantage in a way that they can avoid these risks. But at the same time, I am a firm believer of having a very, very good business plan in place. And I'm a firm believer in the whole concept of having a valid business idea. So I think that the marketing have to be very well thought of. No brand can only rely on sustainable practices. They need to ensure that they have a good business plan in place, that they have good financial plans in place, that they can attract investment if the company is limited by share. If not, either way, I think that their financial planning is crucial. How are they going to get money? Are they going to take a loan? Do they have any grant fundings that they receive? Is it a company limited by share? How are they going to get investment? So financial planning is very important. Marketing, business development, and operation strategy also need to be in place, so that the business can scale. So I think it's kind of like a two-way thing. The sustainability is very important. It can be an advantage, but I think that on its own, unfortunately, might not be enough. So these companies in the fashion industry still, if they are incorporated as a for-profit company, then they need to have these business practices in place, and these things need to be well thought of. I'm not sure if this kind of answered the question, but yeah, I think this is more kind of like my opinion on the question, to be honest.
So, in terms of challenges, what are the main ones that sustainability at a larger scale is facing right now?
I think there are a lot of challenges at the moment. From my perspective, there are a lot of climate change deniers in some sense who don't necessarily believe um, that we do need to do anything, and they do believe that the way we've been living can continue. And I think the arguments with them or convincing them have not been going really well recently with people like Donald Trump. He's not president anymore, obviously, but with him being elected at one point, I think that did do a lot of damage to the credibility of the movement. I think that's going to need to increase in the future. That topic of sustainability, the topic of climate change, is something that needs to be taught at schools more. It needs to be shown that it's not it's not a topic that's up for argument. It's not an opinionated thing. It's an objective thing that's happening to us at the moment, and we do need to do something about it. But interestingly enough, a lot of the changes that we will have to undergo in our life, a lot of the changes that we will have to make in our life, they will require sacrifices in some instances. So you mentioned the biggest challenges. So there are a lot of industries, the meat industry, for example, the transport industry, again, the fashion industry. They contribute quite a lot to climate change and to worsened ecosystem, and they can change as industries, but we also must change and adapt. And I think one of the biggest challenges is us as humans, even the people who do believe in climate change, even the people who are willing to make a change. How much are we willing to do to 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 move to a new normal in some sense? Are we willing to take less flights per year? Are we willing to eat less meat per year? Are we willing to cycle as much as we can instead? Are we willing to do our part? In this whole thing, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because it's very easy for people to feel as an individual in some sense, and that what they're doing doesn't make a difference, but a collective effort by everyone will make a very big difference. um, I think that's a very important kind of thing to consider. The there are other challenges. We talk about climate change a lot in the context of the environment, but there are other things that we are affecting negatively. Biodiversity is one very big thing. All the plants that are dying, all the different animal species that are going extinct as well. And that's not necessarily something related to climate change, for example, but it's another environmental disaster that is happening and that will have a massive effect on us. Water is something where water resources are slowly reducing as well, and and again, that's not something that necessarily has to do with climate change, but it's another very important thing that can lead to political consequences at one point. So the biggest challenge is to look at all of these problems and to slowly start working towards a solution for them. It's not something that's going to get solved overnight. It's not something that's going to get solved in a maybe even in a few years, I think. But we do need set concrete plans to look and find a solution. And at the moment, I don't think that exists yet. And I think that's what the challenge is. The biggest challenge is to make that. And once we've made it, we can slowly at least see a kind of a finish line or an optimistic future in some sense.
Yeah, I think you touched on an important aspect, the fact that sometimes we just feel as individuals and we probably don't really understand the power that we have in our hands. And the change, in fact, starts from the smaller things and the smaller changes that we can bring to the community and to the society. And it could actually just be a starting point towards a bigger and a collective change. And it could be just buying less. We don't need that much clothes anymore just because we're home most of the times. I mean, it's probably not the ideal circumstance, but it is probably just a push for us to understand that we don't need so much. and we're, in fact, I think very lucky to be in a place where we have access to so many things. We're like in countries that can give us a lot of resources, and sometimes we forget that there are other sides of the world that are not as well equipped as ours. And taking a step back and really considering that we could lose everything we have just because of our attitude and our comforts is something that really makes me think. Fashion industry make it so easy for us to buy more and to consume more and just to dispose of goods so easily. It's a cycle that should be broken. So yeah, I think as singles we can do much. We can do it starts from us, right? It starts from us.
I would like to bring up something that's been in the news in the past week or so, which is a group of very amateur investors trying to take on Wall Street hedge funds, and that is it's a very nice example of very kind of individual people who thought they were too small collectively making a big change. And I think that's it's another way to think about it. On our own we don't we maybe can't do enough, but together we can definitely make a very big difference.
And when it comes to social sustainability, what are the main challenges there?
I think the main challenges are around suppliers, lower tier suppliers, making sure that they are also following sustainable practices and trying to kind of measure that and have information about those lower tier suppliers, or even if us as companies don't have information on those lower tier suppliers, can our first tier supplier make sure that everything is kind of going okay and they follow those practices as well? Because I think it's probably very difficult to monitor all the lower tier suppliers as a company because you don't have a direct relationship with them. So what can we do to make sure that those first tier suppliers have those relationships with them and monitor that everything is going right? So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges in kind of social sustainability. But I think it is probably true for all kind of other elements as well. When we talked about living wages, when we talked about safe working conditions, these are still things that are not present in every single company. So I would say all of these are equally important and all of these are equally challenging.
In terms of sustainable practices, apart from recycling, reusing, and reducing, what else can we do?
Recycle, reuse, reduce is something that's very popular in the sustainability world. But I think before you buy anything, the first question you have to ask yourself is, how much do I need this? Do I really need this? And I think it's a bit of a mindfulness exercise when you try and purchase something, to think about it and think about really where it came from, really how much it cost for it to come here, really how much environmental cost did it have, and to think about how long it's going to last with you, to think how important this thing is for you. And I think this is all very important stuff to think about. I think the word recycling in recent years has had this I wouldn't say negative, but a slightly negative effect on people in the sense that they feel better about themselves when they purchase something that's recycled or that's recyclable easily. And I do think that the recycling has brought a bit of a, I wouldn't say negative, but a slightly negative kind of consequence to us, is that we tend to feel better about ourselves and maybe purchase more stuff because they're recyclable, because we feel good about ourselves. And this has been a problem in engineering and in sustainability engineering in a different way, because it has been expected that with renewable energy happening more, rather than people reducing their energy use, they're going to use more energy and they're going to use more electricity, because they're thinking, oh, but it's okay because it's renewable energy, so they feel better about themselves, when in reality the first step should be reducing our demand. And I think this is another problem, is when you find, for example, a shop that sells sustainable clothing that's very cheap but it's very sustainable at the same time. I think the idea isn't to get carried away and just buy lots of them just because they're sustainable, just because they can be recycled, but actually just think about reduce your consumption. And reducing your consumption is the solution to all the problems that we are having. A lot of the problems we're having are as a result of overconsumption. So I think that's the one big thing that you can do when thinking about alternatives to recycle and, well, reduce waste and reuse. The other thing is to be very kind of also mindful about when you do recycle something, how sure are you that it's recycled? And I think there is a tendency of us humans to, when we put something in the recycling bin, to just completely remove it from our worries and responsibilities. I've done my part, I've recycled, nothing else matters. And it, it's a logical way of thinking in some sense for people, but at the same time, this problem isn't, it's not about who's, the problem with climate change, the problem with the environment. It's not about saying it's this person's fault, it's that person's fault. It's actually, it's a collective thing, and whether you think that you recycled or not, it won't matter at the end of the day. So I think be mindful about what's happening with your items. And in a lot of offices, including my old office and where I was working, um, I once stayed after hours and realized that the recycling bin and the normal bin were mixed together before they're being disposed of. So you spend your whole day thinking you're recycling, but actually none of it's getting recycled. If you buy clothes and you think that you can recycle them, or you think that you can donate them, do you know where they're going to? For example, in terms of donation, there are some donation bins that sometimes you find around London. Um, where are they going? Do you know the charity they're going to? Do you know where the charity is sending them to? Um, for example, do you know that in Rwanda, they at one point were getting a lot of donated clothes and secondhand clothes, that it started crashing their own textile market? So is that, and I think it's just being aware of every step, and that helps you make better decisions at the end of the day. Um, you can still buy things. Obviously, when you need them, you need to buy things, and that's there's no question about that. But at the same time, just be aware of the real cost of what you're buying.
Yes, in terms of that design aspect of this, do you think there are other things designers can do when they can take in consideration when actually putting a collection together?
I think it goes back to the topic we spoke about in the beginning, having showing the information in a life cycle assessment, an LCA or an EPD, showing how much the carbon cost of this material is a very, very good step, I think, because then people are aware of what they're paying for. Um, I think using local materials is good. Using local people to produce your garments is good. And Fedra touched on this a lot as well in the terms of the social side, but it's also very important to think about when you produce something, does it have a cost implication to the community around you, or does it provide a benefit to the community around you? For example, can you produce items that are not just beneficial for the person who buys them, but have a long-term kind of benefit to everyone? And when you think about the cost of benefit of any item, for example, let's say a t-shirt, if that t-shirt was made by a local community who's being trained on how to make these things, who's being paid to do these things in a fair way, and then, for example, once this t-shirt has reached its end of life, it's recycled with them as well, who can use it to make something else, then when you buy that item, you're benefiting a lot more people, you're benefiting a lot more things. Could even be that the company is also donating for an environmental cause. So I think try and capture the whole cost, the real cost and benefit of anything you buy, rather than just, oh, it cost me £5 and I'm gonna get a t-shirt. It's actually much larger than that.
Another question I received was about recycling. And so, what are the ways to recycle the fabric of your old clothes? And I think this is a really interesting question because goods disposal is such a huge issue in the fashion industry. I'm going to read a quote, and the average consumer now buys 60% more items of clothing than in 2000, but each garment is kept for half as long. These buying habits contribute to the 39 million tons of post-consumer textile waste. I also have here a chart of a Pulse report from 2017 about the clothing waste per year, and it shows that 57% of clothing waste is sent to landfill and only 10% gets recycled, which is pretty shocking. But going back to the question, before disposing of your goods, there are a few questions you can ask yourself. So, can I fix it? You can extend your clothes' life and add extra value by mending them, for instance. And if that's not something you feel comfortable doing, check with a local seamstress, and for sure they will be happy to help. And if you're in London, in the UK, there's a new app called Sojo, which just got released, and is basically a Deliveroo for clothing alterations and repairs. And I guess that just says it all. Another question you can ask yourself is, can I sell it? If your unwanted clothes are in good resellable conditions, why not look into platforms that can make the selling process easier and smoother for you and just give you back some extra cash? Some platforms I used in the past include eBay, Depop, and Facebook Marketplace. Really great resources. And if you're more into the high-end side of fashion, have a look at Vestiaire Collective. Another question you can ask yourself is, can I upcycle it? You can really get creative and repurpose your unwanted goods into something new. For instance, a good way to reuse textiles, it could be waving or just create nice tapestry or homeware, and you can really have fun and create some cool and unique stuff. Also, councils might have a textile waste solution in place, and there are also charities and organizations that can provide help with recycling of unwanted goods, but most often are just simply overwhelmed with clothes and just can't efficiently manage the system. Most of the times, in fact, unwanted goods get simply sent to third world countries, and that has such a negative impact on their local economic development. Sustainability is just a trend within the fashion industry, or companies are really involving to making a change. I think that term sustainability is definitely a buzzword in the fashion industry, especially in these last couple of years. Um, what's happening with big brands, garment workers, supply chain, and transparency? There is a lot of conversations around this. And I certainly believe the fact that companies are pressured from consumers to take action. As humans, it's really sensitive to hear that there are people along the line that are suffering because we have to get the latest trend of clothes. And there are companies that really actively producing sustainable clothes, ethical working conditions, and so on. But on the other hand, there are also companies that are riding the wave and using sustainability just for marketing purposes. And so the greenwashing, it is a big issue within the fashion industry, because we have fast fashion leaders, they're claiming sustainability practices when all their business model is completely unethical. And that's a big issue, because then consumers think that, right, that is sustainability. I can still get my £5 t-shirt with probably 1% recycled or organic fiber and just not care about it. Our generation is being trained to think in the way that clothes should be cheap, and we don't really research more. But a big responsibility for sustainable brands to retrain consumers and to really make them understand that clothes have a value. There's labor involved, there's energy involved, there's an environmental impact, and so on. All the topics that I think we've discussed today. And it's really important to raise awareness to the fact that we need to question companies. If we feel like that their practices are not sustainable, although they claim they're sustainable, we should really ask what they're doing and educate ourselves first. I think that's the main. Just to wrap it up, I want to thank you so much, Fedra and Salem, for your time. You've been really, really educational, and you, Fedra, shared some really inspiring stories. And I hope that will spark some inspiration also to our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia.
Thanks a lot for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with anyone who might be interested, as it would really help to spread the message out there. And I will see you back here in the next episode.